What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a talk show set expecting laughs only to be blindsided? What was meant to be a lighthearted promotional appearance turned into pure late-night chaos. Mark Wahlberg, known for his no-nonsense Boston roots and tough guy authenticity, showed up to The Tonight Show ready to talk about his latest action film. But Jimmy Fallon had something else in mind, something far from friendly. What followed was one of the most uncomfortable and explosive interviews in recent memory, ending with Wahlberg walking off set in front of a stunned, silent audience. If you thought late-night TV was all scripted smiles and polite chatter, think again. Hit that subscribe button and drop your thoughts in the comments, because this one went off the rails fast. The night started like any other. The Tonight Show band was playing, the crowd was buzzing. Jimmy Fallon opened with his usual mix of topical jokes, quirky energy, and self-deprecating charm. Everything looked normal, and it wasn't. Wahlberg, the evening's main guest, walked out to thunderous applause. He smiled, waved, and sat down like he'd done 100 times before. He was there to promote his new action thriller, a film he'd poured his heart into. Behind the scenes, he was calm, prepared, and genuinely excited to share the project with fans. But Fallon had other plans. Mark Wahlberg, everybody, Fallon announced, smiling wide. "You look great, man. Thanks for having me, Jimmy." "Always good to be here," Wahlberg replied with his usual chill. Fallon held up the movie poster. "So this new movie intense stuff looks like a lot of explosions, a lot of punching. But before we get into all that, his tone shifted. "I gotta ask you about something that's been all over social media lately." Mark's smile faded. Just slightly. He sensed the shift. This wasn't how their interviews normally began. "What's that?" he asked cautiously. Fallon leaned in. "There's been some criticism about your past. You know, stuff you did when you were younger, in Boston. A lot of people are saying it's time to really address that more directly, especially now that you're so successful." The room fell quiet. The crowd, the band, even the backstage crew seemed unsure of what was happening. This wasn't a planned segment. This wasn't promotional. This was personal. Wahlberg sat back slightly, jaw tightening. "Jimmy," he said, his voice steady but cool, "I've addressed those things many times over the years. I've apologized. I've taken responsibility. I've worked hard to be better. But that's not why I'm here tonight." A more experienced host, Mitov, backed off, shifted to the movie, kept things moving. But Fallon pushed harder. "Yeah, but don't you think in today's climate just saying sorry isn't enough? Actions have consequences, right?" Now, the tension was unmistakable. Audience members shifted uncomfortably. Wahlberg's publicist was seen frowning off stage. Mark's voice dropped a level, his accent sharpening. "Listen, Jimmy, I don't know what kind of show you think you're running, but this wasn't what we agreed on. We were supposed to be talking about the movie, not digging up things from 30 years ago that I've already taken ownership of." Fallon leaned forward, trying to justify. "I'm just asking questions the audience wants answered. Isn't that what good journalism is?" Mark blinked, incredulous. "Good journalism?" he repeated. "This is a comedy show, not 60 Minutes. You bring me here, crack jokes, throw me under the bus, and call it journalism." The energy had shifted completely. Fallon's grin had faded. Wahlberg wasn't playing along. The room was locked in an uncomfortable silence. "You want to make me your punchline?" Wahlberg said, rising from his seat. "Then do it without me." He took off his mic and dropped it in Fallon's lapnut with a dramatic slam, but a quiet finality. Then, without another word, he turned and walked off stage. Fallon was left speechless. No jokes, no recovery, no outro music, just stunned silence. "Since when is The Tonight Show about journalism?" Wahlberg's voice cut through the studio. "With disbelief, you play games with celebrities and read tweets. This is supposed to be entertainment, not some kind of ambush." The air in the studio thickened. The exchange was escalating fast. Neither man seemed willing to back down. Fallon looked locked in, determined to steer the conversation down a road Wahlberg had no intention of following. Wahlberg, on the other hand, was growing visibly agitated, feeling blindsided and betrayed by what had once been a trusted late-night format. "I think our audience is smart enough to handle serious conversations," Fallon said, his tone now sharper, almost combative. Maybe the real issue is that you're not comfortable being held accountable. That hit like a slap. The studio fell silent. Cameras kept rolling. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't just tension. This was the start of a complete unraveling. Leaned forward, eyes burning, held accountable, he said, his voice rising. Who made you the accountability police? Jimmy, you want to talk about honesty? Let's start with the fact that you and your producers promised me this would be a straight-up promotional interview. You're ambushing someone who came here in good faith to support your show. The audience sat frozen. This wasn't awkward banter. This was a confrontation, raw and real, happening in front of hundreds in the studio and millions more watching at home. Then Fallon made the most unexpected move of the night. He didn't de-escalate. He didn't apologize. He doubled down with a smirk. You're getting awfully defensive for a guy who says he's got nothing to hide. Maybe the problem is you're not used to being challenged. Anymore. Hollywood kisses your feet now. There was an audible gasp. The front row visibly flinched. This wasn't the affable, joke-cracking Jimmy Fallon they knew. This was someone picking a fight. Wahlberg's face hardened. His expression flickered disbelief, then anger, then something closer to disappointment. You know what, Jimmy? He said, his voice now calm but ice cold. I've been doing this for 25 years. I've sat across from real journalists. Tough ones who ask hard questions with respect. What you're doing right now isn't journalism. It's not even entertainment. It's just cheap. Fallon laughed, but it was sharp and hollow, no trace of humor behind it. You know what's cheap? He said, coming on a show expecting everyone to lob softball questions while you push your latest movie. The days of celebrity worship are over. Mark Wahlberg's patience snapped. Celebrity worship, he snapped back. I've never asked for that. I asked for basic respect and the interview format you promised me. His voice now carried the unmistakable grit of Boston steel. You want to be a serious interviewer? Fine. But don't lie to my team. Don't ambush your guests. And don't pretend this is about accountability when it's clearly about you trying to look important. By now, even the band, usually quick to chime in with a light beat to break tension, was silent. The camera crew exchanged worried glances. Fallon's own staff looked uneasy. And then Fallon made his worst move yet. He turned to the audience with an exaggerated shrug. Whoa, folks, he said, forcing a grin. I guess we're seeing the real Mark Wahlberg tonight. Not the polished movie star, but the guy who can't handle a few tough questions. The audience didn't laugh. There was no applause, no cheers, just stunned silence. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others sat stone-faced, unsure if what they were witnessing was even real anymore. The illusion of late-night charm had shattered. And in its place, an unfiltered, unplanned, and unforgettable showdown between two men live on national television. No one in the audience could quite believe what they were seeing, or understand why their usually light-hearted host was behaving this way. Fallon's tone was foreign, his smile gone, and Mark Wahlberg was staring at him, silent for a long moment. The fury in his eyes barely held in check. Then, quietly, dangerously, Wahlberg spoke. You just made a huge mistake, Jimmy. His voice was low, deliberate, cutting through the tension like a blade. You don't know me. You don't know my story. And you clearly don't know the first thing about professionalism. The audience froze. I came here to talk about a movie that dozens of people worked their asses off to make. I came here to entertain your audience and support your show. But instead, you decided to turn this into some kind of personal attack for what? Ratings? Ego? I honestly can't even tell. Fallon tried to interject. Look, if you can't handle the heat, but Wahlberg didn't let him finish. Handle the heat, he snapped. This isn't heat. This is garbage. Real heat comes from real journalists asking real questions about real issues. What you're doing right now, it's schoolyard nonsense dressed up as an interview. Now, the audience was visibly unsettled. Some shifted in their seats. Others pulled out their phones. Not to record a memory, but to document what was quickly becoming a late-night implosion. Fallon, flustered, but still trying to maintain face, pushed back. Maybe the problem is you're not as tough as you pretend. To be in your movies, he said, sneering. All that Boston tough guy stuff, just an act, right? That crossed a line. Wahlberg leaned forward, eyes locked on Fallon's with razor-sharp precision. "You want to question my toughness?" he said, voice low and lethal. "Toughness is growing up in Dorchester, broke, with nothing. Toughness is taking responsibility for your mistakes and showing up every damn day to be better. Toughness isn't sitting in a cushy studio chair taking cheap shots at guests who showed up here in good faith." At that moment, the balance of power in the room shifted entirely. Fallon looked like exactly what he was, a talk show host who had picked the wrong fight with the wrong guest. "I think you're taking this way too seriously," Fallon mumbled, his voice suddenly small. "It's just television, Mark. We're just having a conversation." Wahlberg laughed, bitter, humorless. "Just television," he repeated, stunned. "You think that justifies ambushing someone? You think it's okay to lie to a guest's team and then try to humiliate them on live TV? This may just be a segment to you, but for me, this is my life, my reputation, my career." Silence swallowed the studio. Fallon made a last-ditch effort to regain control. "You know what, Mark, made. Maybe we just agreed to disagree and move on. Let's talk about the movie. I think we've both made our points." Wahlberg's look was pure disdain. "Move on," he repeated. "You think you can just hit reset after you question someone's character on national television. You think you can throw punches and then smile your way out of the consequences. That's not how it works, Jimmy. That's not how any of this works." The silence that followed was thunderous. Even the cameras, still humming in the background, felt too loud. Fallon sat motionless, the showman completely stripped away. The once charming host now looked like a man realizing too late that he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Mark, I think you're overreacting," he tried weakly, no conviction behind his words. "This is live television. Sometimes things get heated, ... That's what makes it interesting." Wahlberg's laugh was short and cold. "Interesting," he shook his head. "You think ambushing someone, disrespecting your audience, and sabotaging your own show is interesting. You didn't just disrespect me, Jimmy. You disrespected everyone who tunes into this show expecting honesty, humor, and class. And today Night 2 proved you're not capable of delivering any of it." Then, without another word, Wahlberg stood up, pulled off his mic, and walked off the set. The audience didn't clap, they didn't boo, they didn't move. And just like that, Jimmy Fallon's idea of good television had spiraled into something unrecognizable. Camera operators glanced at one another, unsure of their next move. This wasn't the usual segment filled with charades and celebrity trivia. This was something else, unfiltered, raw, and dangerously real. No one had called for a commercial break. No producers had signaled to cut. The tension was too electric, the confrontation too gripping. The cameras kept rolling. "Look," Fallon said, trying to reel it all back, "I'm sorry if you feel like I crossed a line." But the words felt plastic, rehearsed like a PR note he'd memorized. "Maybe we both got a little carried away. Why don't we start over? Talk about the movie, crack a few jokes, get back to having some fun." Wahlberg just stared at him, disbelief written all over his face. "Start over," he repeated, voice laced with disgust. "You think this is some game? You spent 10 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television, and now that it's not going how you planned, you want a do-over." The audience was frozen in place. Some people had their phones out, instinctively recording what they knew would go viral. Others sat in stunned silence, watching a moment unfold. That felt too real to be scripted. "I wasn't trying to humiliate you," Fallon protested, but his voice cracked with desperation. "I just wanted to have a real conversation for once. Everyone's always so fake on these shows." Wahlberg leaned forward. "A real conversation," he said, voice rising. "Then let's really talk. Let's talk about how your producers called my publicist yesterday and promised this would be a light, fun segment about my film. Let's talk about how your team explicitly said no personal or controversial questions. And then let's talk about how you looked me in the eye backstage and told me you were excited to hear about the movie." Fallon's face turned crimson. His eyes darted toward the wings, where producers and staff were no doubt panicking behind the scenes. "Mark, I think you're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be," he said, forcing a strained smile. Voice cracked with something deeper than anger betrayal. "A bigger deal? Jimmy, do you have any idea what it's like to sit across from someone you thought you could trust? Someone whose show you've supported for years and watched them turn on you just to score a few cheap laughs? His voice trembled. From weakness, but from the weight of honest pain. Do you understand what that feels like? Now the audience wasn't just stunned, they were shaken. What started as late-night entertainment had transformed into something personal, almost too intimate for television. People weren't watching an interview anymore. They were witnessing a public betrayal. "I wasn't trying to destroy you," Fallon muttered, his tone unsure. "I was just ... asking questions." Wahlberg laughed a short, bitter sound. "You call that asking questions," he snapped. "You weren't asking, Jimmy. You were accusing. You dug up my past, things I've taken responsibility for, things I've spoken about publicly, and you used them like weapons. For what? For your ego? For a viral clip?" The confrontation had now dragged on for nearly 15 minutes, far beyond a typical Tonight Show segment. The control room was likely in crisis, but the exchange was too explosive to interrupt. No one dared cut away. Fallon tried one final olive branch. "Mark, I respect you as an actor and a person. Maybe I came at this wrong. I just wanted to show people a different kind of interview, something real." Wahlberg's voice dropped, quiet and cold. "You have a funny way of showing respect. Real respect would have meant honoring your word. Real respect would have meant asking me in private if I was comfortable discussing my past, not ambushing me live. Respect is treating your guest like a human being, not a headline." Now you could hear the air conditioner humming above the silent crowd. Every pair of eyes was locked on Wahlberg. Even Fallon's band sat motionless, their usual transitional riffs long forgotten. Fallon, visibly shrinking now, muttered one last line. "I'm sorry you feel that way." But even he knew it wasn't enough. Not for Wahlberg, not for the audience, and not for the millions who would see the clips, read the headlines, and ask themselves the same question. What just happened to The Tonight Show? "You're sorry I feel that way?" Wahlberg repeated, incredulous, his voice rising with disbelief. "You're not sorry for what you did, Jimmy. You're sorry that I'm not just sitting here and taking it. You're sorry that your little stunt, your plan to humiliate me on national television, is blowing up in your face." Fallon opened his mouth to respond, but Wahlberg raised a hand, and the room obeyed. He didn't have to shout. His presence, his rage-controlled but volcaniquist enough to silence everything. "You know what Wahlberg said?" Voice suddenly flat. "I'm done. I'm done with this conversation, this interview." He stood, slowly, deliberately. "You want to play games with people's lives and careers. You want to ambush guests who show up in good faith? Fine, but count me out." A collective gasp swept through the audience. They had seen the storm coming, but witnessing it finally break was still stunning. Fallon's face drained of color. "Mark, wait!" he stammered, panic creeping into his voice. "Don't leave, we can fix this. Just let's talk about your movie. That's what people really want." Wahlberg stopped, turned. The glare he gave Fallon could have cut glass. "Now you want to talk about the movie?" he scoffed, full of contempt. "After spending the last 15 minutes trying to tear me apart, now you want to do the interview. We should have had from the beginning. It's too late, Jimmy. You made your choice the moment you turned this couch into a firing squad." Fallon tried again. "The audience wants to hear about your film," he said weakly. "Don't disappoint them." Wahlberg's eyes narrowed. "Don't disappoint them?" He stepped closer, every syllable like a nail. "You disappointed them, Jimmy. They came for entertainment and you gave them a hit piece. They came to laugh and you gave them a takedown. You didn't just disrespect me, you disrespected them." The cameras captured every moment as Wahlberg removed his microphone, set it down carefully on the table beside him, and straightened his jacket. His movements were precise, controlled, but his fury pulsed beneath every step. He looked out at the silent studio and then back at Fallon. "This is what happens," he said, voice low but commanding. "When you forget that there are real people behind the celebrity facade, when you start treating guests like punching bags, not people, when you confuse being a talk show host with being a journalist and fail at both." Fallon, now visibly desperate, made one final attempt. "Mark, please, let's just finish. Start fresh. You can talk about whatever you want." Wahlberg looked at him with something closer to pity. "Then anger? You still don't get it, do you?" he said, shaking his head. This isn't about the interview. This is about integrity, about keeping your word, about treating people with basic human decency. And tonight, Jimmy, you failed on all counts. With that, Wahlberg turned toward the exit. His footsteps echoed through the studio like closing statements in a courtroom. The audience sat frozen, watching one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces walk off one of television's most iconic sets. Just before he disappeared backstage, Wahlberg paused. He turned one last time to look at Fallon still slumped in, his chair, stunned, broken, small. "You know what the saddest part is, Jimmy?" he said quietly. "I used to respect you. I really did. I thought you were one of the good guys. I thought you understood that you could be funny without being cruel, that you could be clever without being a coward. I thought you knew entertainment didn't have to come at the cost of someone's dignity." He took a breath. "But I guess I was wrong." And just like that, Mark Wahlberg walked off The Tonight Show, leaving behind a stunned studio, a devastated host, and what would soon become one of the most talked-about meltdowns in late-night history. The cameras lingered for a moment on Fallon's FISA cocktail of regret, embarrassment, and realization before the show finally, mercifully, cut to commercial. What do you think? Was Wahlberg right to walk away? Or should he have stayed and fought through it? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more explosive behind-the-scenes moments from Hollywood's biggest names. Because in this industry, sometimes the real drama isn't in the movies.